Freeman is responsible for the environmental management practice in Hong Kong and Japan. Freeman provides strategic advice to investors and decision makers to formulate environmental management practice for more than 30 years to improve their operations. He is also an in-house ESG advisor for AECOM's Asia operation. He is currently the Vice Chair of Hong Kong Institute of Qualified Environmental Professionals and Advisory Committee on Environmental Science for Chinese University of Hong Kong and City University of Hong Kong, School of Energy and Environment. Our other speaker is Mr. Peter Lee. Peter is the General Manager, Sustainability of the Airport Authority. He supports, guides, and advises the authority on the formulation and implementation of long-term sustainability strategies. He also leads and manages all environmental matters related to the planning and implementation of the expansion of the Hong Kong International Airport into a free runway system, which is to maintain Hong Kong as an international aviation hub at the heart of Asia-Pacific region. Peter is a founding fellow of the Hong Kong Institute of Qualified Environmental Professionals and the Secretary General of the Marine Ecology Enhancement Fund and the Fisheries Enhancement Fund. Today, our speakers will talk about the planning for climate resilience at the Hong Kong International Airport. Welcome, Freeman and Peter.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for the organizers to invite us to give this presentation about how we address climate resilience at the Hong Kong International Airport. Next slide. Next slide, please. Climate crisis is the theme of today's seminar. And as you all understand, we're facing increasing numbers of hot days and hot nights. You know, the cold days are also decreasing, but the temperatures keep rising. And we have more severe rainfall, you know, with heavy precipitation and more frequent. And also the tropical cyclone also has intensified as well as bringing in more rainfall. The sea level rise and also storm surge is pretty frequent. Next slide. We see a lot of extreme weather affecting Hong Kong. More recently, the super typhoon Hector in 2017, you know, have estimated direct economic loss of more than 1.2 billion. And in 2018, super typhoon Mangkhut has caused economic loss of even much higher at 4.6 billion. So all this happening and affecting our daily life. And we actually also seeing the sea level of Victoria Harbour rising, and the trends are still going up. Next slide. So how can we sort of achieve resilience under this changing climate? First, we have to identify the threats that we are facing, and we have to assess the associated risks from those threats, and also to ascertain the long-term aspiration of how we are going to deal with this. And through prioritizing of the adaptation actions, we can then leverage the investments to address what we need to protect. Next slide. This is a adaptation and resilience approach proposed by the government under the Climate Action Plan. And through sort of strengthening our infrastructure, we are able to face this sort of changing climate. And I think today there has been a lot of speakers touching on these subjects, and I won't dwell on too much of that. But in essence, we have to sort of design our infrastructure to cope with this increasing frequency of typhoon, with projected higher wind speed, and also the temperature is going to keep rising, and the infrastructure has to be decided to cope with this increasing temperature. And of course, flooding risk is also very important. And the government has actually addressed more than 100 flooding backspots, and they have remaining 4 to address in the coming years. And also, I think the transport system, as well as contingency planning for nature disaster, and also the emergency alert system has all been touched upon by some of the previous speakers. And so that's sort of reinforced how important these things need to be addressed, in facing this climate change. Next slide. The government has actually commissioned a number of studies to address this changing climate. And this is one example of the, how Hong Kong coastal adaptation program need to be in place. And there's more recent study on shoreline management, etc. Next slide. Some are more relevant, and like in the Tung Chung East reclamations, we actually introduced the use of eco shoreline to help provide a better waterfront, which is also able to sort of face this sort of changing climate and be more resilient, and also enhancing the environment, and also increasing the social value of the waterfronts, and to provide better pace for the public. Next slide. Just a few more examples that we have been doing for the government on the drainage improvement, as well as the landslide prevention program. And but recently, we see more emphasis is going to be on those critical infrastructure, like the water supplies department, the drainage services department, and also the highways department are sort of focusing on those aspects. And this is, again, happening more and more in the recent years. Next slide. So what we are going to do, one of the means is, is to address this climate-related incidents through disclosure. Next slide. The task force on climate-related financial disclosure is one of the more useful means to report, as the TCFD recommendation are based on a very structured approach based on the 4 thematic areas that represent core elements of an organizational operations, covering the governance, strategy, risk management, metrics, and targets. Next slide. In fact, Hong Kong's Exchange and Clearing Limited is also adopting the same approach. And with reference to TCFD framework, urging listed company to report climate-related disclosure by 2025. This is going to become a mandatory requirement for all the listed companies. Next slide. So today's presentation is on the Hong Kong International Airport and how, the airport is going to survive this climate change, and what the Hong Kong International Airport is going to do, and to address this. And this is really the meat of today's presentation. And both myself and Peter will give you some more insight how we have sort of addressed these changing situations by incorporating a lot of the airport asset in this sort of studies. Next slide. Next slide. Airport Authority has commissioned AECOM to undertake a climate resilience study for the Hong Kong International Airport in 2020 to identify existing control and future actions to strengthen Hong Kong International Airport's operational resilience and adaptive capacity under these changing climate situations. Next slide. We initially sort of identify and prioritize the climate-related risk and opportunity. First, focusing on physical risk, and this is sort of including a preliminary screening of a number of assets, and also full stakeholder engagement within the HKA and with selected business partner to understand what will affect their operation under this sort of changing climate situations, including, climate hazard like typhoon, storm surges, extreme heat days, or rainfall event, and also addressing what would be the direct damage to this asset. And this is sort of really a very systematic exercise going through with the asset owner as well as the AECOM business partner, and to develop the likelihood and consequence of each event. And then we can identify which asset is going to be more affected and which is more vulnerable. And then we can go through further analysis through the deep dive exercise. Next slide. We have also looked into the transition risk and opportunity, referring to the adverse and beneficial effect that arise from the rapid or aggressive transitions to a low carbon economy. I think with the Climate Action Plan, there has been clear target set for everyone in Hong Kong to reduce their impact. And in return, I think the Secretary Wong rightly mentioned the electricity tariff will going to be increased, and this is actually what we will need to look at as some of this sort of transition risks. And also, I think in terms of the transport, changing to all electric, and whether the airport is sort of ready for this. So I think I will sort of pass to Peter to go into the more details of some of the facility and how they going to address this, as the recommendation of the study itself. Okay, Peter, over to you.
Okay, thank you, Freeman. So let me share the PowerPoint. Okay. Okay, so as mentioned by Freeman, I think in early 2020, the airport authority commissioned AECOM to carry out an 18-month climate resilience studies for the Hong Kong international airports. And to ensure the study will produce meaningful and useful output, we understand the importance to have high level of engagement and involvement of the colleagues at different levels and operation units in AA. So the studies was overseen by a cross-departmental steering committee co-chaired by two of our executive directors. And the study also taken into account inputs from 20 AA departments and through about 100 meetings, workshops, and assessments. And as part of the study, we have examined the climate readiness of the Hong Kong International Airport and concluded that the HKA currently already has high level of resilience and preparedness. And as some of you may recall, following the major typhoon Mangkhut in September 2018, there was limited damage to the airport, and we were able to resume our operation very quickly. And this is very much related to the current control measure in place at the airports, including those shown in this slide, covering operational procedures, monitoring and maintenance mechanism, emergency management system, and also physical protection infrastructures. And as mentioned by Freeman, our climate resilience study covers both physical risk assessment and transition risk assessment with scenario analysis. And the chart here shows different climate projection forecasted by the scientists. And the vertical axis show the total carbon emission over the year, and the horizontal axis show the time up to the end of this century. The red line show the top business as usual scenarios, i.e. only existing measure in place with minimum global efforts in combating climate change. And people call this RCP 8.5 scenarios. And under this scenario, the temperature rise at the end of the century will be about 3.2 to 5.4 degrees Celsius compared with the pre-industrial levels. And the bottom blue line shows the other end of the projections, the RCP 2.6 scenario, which represents a rapid and aggressive transition to a low-carbon economy. The temperature rise under these scenarios is about 0.9 degree to 2.3 degrees Celsius at the end of the century. As many of you may know, the goal of the Paris Agreement is to limit global warming to well below 2 degrees Celsius and preferably to 1.5 degrees Celsius compared to industrial levels. And in our assessment, we take a conservative approach. So for physical risk assessment, we take the RCP 8.5 scenarios for 2030, 2050, and end of century, and the RCP 2.6 scenario for the transition of risk assessment. And for the physical risk assessment, after a comprehensive engagement with our operation department, we have shortlisted 6 priority assets, which we consider are more vulnerable to climate-related hazards for deep dive assessment. The 6 priority assets are shortlisted from about 40 assets in the airports. And they are the airfield, including runway and drainage, airfield power distribution system, airfield tunnels, baggage handling system, terminal and building structures, and chiller and seawater systems. As I mentioned before, the physical risk assessment covers 3 time frames: near term at 2030, medium term at 2050, and then long term at the end of the century. And the assessment examines the impact associated with different hazards relevant to the airport operations. And in terms of climate scenarios, apart from the RCP scenarios, given our airport is at a coastal location, we also assess what we call the H++ scenario, which represents a projection with more rapid loss of the ice sheets. The assessment concluded that there is no extreme risk identified for near term and for medium term. And during the course of the study, we have also carried out a seawall studies and an airport-wide drainage study to inform the physical risk assessment. The studies involve comprehensive modeling to assess the flooding risk due to cumulative impact of sea level rise, storm surge, and overtopping waves, together with extreme rainfall. And we are happy to see that the modeling results confirmed that the Hong Kong International Airport is well protected from flooding with our existing drainage system and the seawall at 6.5 meter MPD level. And for the transition risk assessment, we have identified a number of priority transition risks and opportunity relevant to the airport authorities. These include, for example, global adoption of net zero emission policy, shifting customer preference to travel and flight, uptake of low carbon technology, etc., as you can see from this slide. And to address these priority risks and opportunities, we have formulated the corresponding management and control strategies. And this includes the setting of net zero carbon target, which the airport authority officially announced it in December last year. The implementation of an green airport design and construction strategies for airport developments, the support and promotion of the use of sustainable aviation fuel, etc. Besides, as mentioned by Freeman at the first part of this presentation about the TCFD, our first TCFD statement was also published in our annual sustainability report released in November last year. And this helped to provide confidence to our investors on airport authorities' resilience to climate change. And we are also one of the first few Asian airports to publish a TCFD statement. And to summarize, the climate resilience studies confirmed that the Hong Kong International Airport already has a high level of resilience with the existing controls in place. And the study also produced a climate adaptation and resilience plan to set out a list of actions to further enhance the airport's resilience. And this plan will be reviewed every 5 years or as part of our planned major investment. The study also developed a guidance note to communicate airport authorities' expectation to embed climate change consideration into our future infrastructure development. Lastly, the TCFD disclosure position also gave us a leaders in Hong Kong as well as our peers in aviation sectors on climate-related disclosure. And this ends my part of the presentation, and thank you for the attention. And see if anyone have any question.
Thank you, Freeman and Peter. It's a very comprehensive presentation. I have a first question for you. How do you think that having the resilience plan, is it something very expensive or actually is something that add value to your asset?
I would say this is more like a body check. So we try to verify whether our existing control measure is sufficient and adequate and robust enough. Of course, as I said, I mean, with the extreme weather in the past, including major typhoon, etc., we can survive and actually resume operation in a very short period of time. But of course, with the emerging climate change situation, whether we are still resilient enough towards in the next decade or even towards the end of the century, this is something that we want to examine and verify. And the studies actually give us some insights in what we need to follow and to do in advance in our for our existing facilities as well as in our planned projects. Yeah.
When we compare the Hong Kong airport with the Kansai airport in Japan, which were completed about the same time, we see a big difference. The Kansai airport has experienced great damages and kind of disruption during severe storm conditions. How do you think, what's the key success to Hong Kong airport?
In fact, this is a very common question asked by our colleagues and also by other stakeholders. And we can see actually flooding is a kind of a major impact to the Kansai airport in the past. And this is partly, of course, due to, I would say, the sedimentation of the whole platform. And which in the case of Hong Kong International Airport, as I mentioned, our platform level is at 6.5 MPD level, which is quite robust, although we are building the first airport back in the 19th century, but of course that level is quite high regarding the prevailing sea level at the time. And so that's why in this round of climate resilience studies, AECOM together with other consultants actually help us to do another robust modeling to confirm that with more sea level rise and with extreme rainfall and with typhoon wave surge, etc., all together, acting together, we can still survive at least up to the middle of the century. Towards the end of the century, we may have some localized flooding that we still have quite some time to tackle this, to make sure that we are still resilient towards the end of the century. And as well, of course, we have a very robust drainage system in place. Just in case we have been flooded, actually, we are confident that the flooding can be removed in a short period of time so that the operation disruption can be minimized to the shortest possible. Yeah.
I have a question for Freeman. The airport, the Hong Kong airport is built, as Peter has said, at a sea level 6.5 meters above, 6.5 meters above sea level. Do you think this is the kind of standard or even more stringent standards you may adopted for future infrastructures in Hong Kong?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, as I mentioned, a lot of the government departments are trying to study, major infrastructure sort of the resilience facing this sort of climate change. And of course, you probably are aware of the recent changes in the design handbook that the say the reclamation level as well as seawall has been incorporating a lot of changes in terms of the sea level rise, and sea level rise is in general is not as critical, but together with storm surges and the tidal influence, this can make it more sort of severe. And I think, in some of the past typhoon event, and for example, Sa-Tin has been flooded quite severely, and a lot of the situation are combined effect of the sea level rise plus the tidal surges. And so definitely, I mean, critical infrastructure asset need to be reviewed in the face of these sort of climate changes.
Thank you, Peter and Freeman. So we learned a lot from your presentation today, particularly about that we should be more planned ahead using the kind of resilience study the climate resilience studies that you have adopted. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.